Hey everyone, I finished another book, so it's time for another Glitterature. This one I walked into knowing I was going to love it because I love this author and I've loved everything that I've read that she's written. I've read several of her books, but this one might be my very favorite one. I was so into this book. I mean, I spent nights like where I would stay up all night reading this book, where I was tweeting like, I am so in love with the book that I'm reading right now. I just love it. And there's actually, this one's called The White Queen, and there's a book that she wrote called The Red Queen that's like a parallel book. It's going on in the same time, but it's going on against like the other queen that there are lots of mentions to in this book, but I don't know, it's weird because I want to read it, but at the same time, like, I know I'm not going to be on that queen's side because this book like makes you be on this queen's side. So I can't imagine like changing my alliances in the other book, but I'm sure the other book would make you want to be on her side. I don't know. It's just, but I'm definitely going to read it because I am just in love with her books. I want to read every single book she has written. This book was about Edward IV, I believe, and Elizabeth Woodville, which was actually the grandmother of Henry VIII. I think I'm getting all my facts right. And she was the mother of the Lost Princes of the Tower, which is why I wanted to read this book, because when I went to London, which I'm really into like history and like old stories, especially when they pertain to British royalty. I just have like a fascination with that. So especially like the old timey, like this was in the 1400s, it was a long time ago. I remember the story from when I visited the Tower of London, how they talk about the Lost Princes of the Tower and how it's a mystery, and these two princes were murdered and they just disappeared, and there were rumors that they were buried under the steps and in various places and they were never found. I don't know if to this day they've been found. I think they did find the bones of two boys that match the ages that it could have been like later on, but I don't even know for sure. I need to like do like modern research on this and see. All I know is from the story. Now this story is based in fact, but it's a fiction novel. So basically what the author does, she specializes in writing books about like this time period. She did a lot of books on Henry VIII. She wrote The Other Boleyn Girl, and there was a movie that was made out of that. So she basically like does all of her fact checking. So she does all of her research and she incorporates it into her novels, but then she weaves a story around it. So she makes it readable. So you're not reading a history book, it's a novel, you know, you get into it. And this one, I got into this one immediately because this is the king that fell in love with a commoner and married for love. He fell in love with this girl on the side of the road, literally in the first chapter. And that's why you get so into it so quickly. It's not one of those books where you have to get into it for several chapters. I got into it right away. The girl he falls in love with is older. She has two boys. She's a widow. I mean, it's not your like typical fairy tale where this king just like falls in love with this beautiful princess from a foreign country and marries her. This was a commoner off the streets. Like he met her in the woods one day and fell in love with her and ended up marrying her and making her queen. And she has tons of like children and all these heirs, including Elizabeth, her eldest girl, who ends up marrying Henry VII and ends up having Henry VIII, and then in turn has Elizabeth I, which was like the greatest queen of England. So it's just like, it's weird how all these stories are intertwined. I'm really fascinated by it. It's kind of like one of my nerdy sides coming out, but I loved this book. I totally recommend it. I can't even go through everything. All I can say is if you're at all interested in that kind of romance novel slash factual fiction slash this time period, I totally recommend this book along with all of her books, but I really especially love this one. It's kind of interesting to me, you know, when the book starts, you have the king falling in love with Elizabeth Woodville, who's a commoner essentially, and she has these two sons. And honestly, I don't know why I thought this, but I thought they would be the Lost Princes in the Tower because they're children at the beginning of the book. And I think the Lost Princes in the Tower were like 9 and 11. So I was thinking, yeah, I mean, the book could be several years long and they could be the princes. No, like she has like 12 kids or something crazy. She has so many children in between them and the actual princes that are, you know, in the tower towards the end of the book. So it's just really interesting. And one thing I really liked about this novel was that the author has this old story of one of the very first versions of The Little Mermaid that's weaved through the story. Here's an example page. It's like pages like this of this story that's weaved through the entire book. So like every couple chapters there will be like another section, and it's about Melusina, the water goddess. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but basically she was this water goddess that was half fish, half woman, and this man falls in love with her and she decides to give up her fins to be a human, to be with him. It's basically The Little Mermaid, or the start of that story that the Brothers Grimm then turned into The Little Mermaid. And be with this man, but once a month she turns back into a fish. And the entire thing was talking about how like then the man finds out that she's still a fish once a month and he doesn't like it anymore, and she abandons him or something. But it's this fairy tale that's woven through, and the whole like connection to the story is that this Melusina water goddess is supposed to be supposedly Elizabeth Woodville's like ancestor, like great-great-great-grandmother or something. So Elizabeth Woodville actually believes in witchcraft, which is really interesting because I know in Henry VIII's time, they're so religious, they would never, ever have had anything to do with like paganism or witchcraft in their court. But the queen like believes in it, and the king is well aware that the queen like believes in all this stuff. And it's just kind of weird that it was allowed back then, because I know later on it becomes really, really bad, and like, you know, they would murder you without even thinking twice. And I know that Europe went through time periods where, you know, they did like big witch hunts and then it would settle down. But this seems to be a time period where the king completely accepted it and thought that, you know, it was okay. The story definitely makes you feel for the queen, and it makes you want to be on her side. And the, you know, parallel story, The Red Queen, I'm really curious to read it because I don't know how they're going to make it to where you want to feel compassion for this other queen as well, because she seems to be trying to mess everything up for this one. I also felt really bad for the princes at the end of the story, and I felt like they're so young. They were literally children, and like they had all this political stuff going on in their lives and they had no control over it, and it just made me sad. There was one point where I started like crying because like the eldest prince, the heir to the throne, that thought that he was like, when his father died, he was supposed to be king, and his uncle comes and just like, it's like the evil uncle that I feel like is in every fairy tale story, just comes and basically like takes his throne away from him. And he's like 11 years old or something, maybe he's 9, he's really young. And it's just like the child like doesn't understand. Like he feels, it was a lot. Like they definitely, she writes it really well to where you understand everything that's going on, you don't get confused, and it's not incredibly difficult to read. It's just written in a really like fluid way. I love her novels, I love her stories, I highly recommend this. I don't really know what else to say without completely ruining a lot of things, but I got through it really quickly. I was only bored probably in one section that I can think of that was just kind of a war scene that like dragged on for a really long time, but the story itself I really liked, and the ending wasn't terrible. Like it was almost one of those things where you think that the ending's just going to be so bad, and in the end they kind of wrap it up where it's not, you don't feel like terrible for the family or anything, but it is sad what happens to those boys. And I want to go back to the Tower of London now that I know so many more things. I've read so many books about it since visiting. I was so little when I went. I want to go back. You can video response any book reviews you have, or if you have any suggestions for books you want me to read, leave them in the comments below and I will get back to you. Check out this book. I love it, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.